Hello everyone, welcome to this General Conference seminar, and I am here with Brother Reinking, and we are going to talk about one team, many personalities. So we both worked in different work environments. I first started out as an office manager of a construction company, as well as I went to a credit analyst and then became an HR and finance director of a small hospital. So on the course of my career, I have been able to work with different teams and realize how important different personalities and skills are important to a team. And now that I work at UPCI headquarters, I am able to use those skills and really help with effective team building. And that's what we want to talk to you about today.
Absolutely. You know, we all come from different perspectives. Throughout my experience in ministry has been working at a local church as a youth worker, which meant I had a youth team, but then I was a part of a larger church leadership team, and the Lord allowed me to be involved in district work, which meant you're on different boards and committees, whether it was coming to General Conference for the General Youth Committee and all the different personalities that happen there, and then now leading that, helping to lead that committee, and like you mentioned, being involved on other boards and interactions. So I've seen the local church interaction with being, whether I was a team member or a leader, district level, national or North American level, and then of course I attend the church here locally.
Absolutely.
where I feel like I'm a follower, not necessarily a leader, but also a participator. So I see the different levels of communication and participation there. So how that affects all that, and so I think that's it's interesting what God has allowed us to, you know, in our life, and what that helps us to learn. So that's from that perspective is what we're going to talk to you about today on One Team, Many Personalities. Think back with me, if you will, to maybe a recent church meeting, whether it was on Zoom or maybe you were able to have it in person, or before everything has changed. You might have heard phrases something like this. A leader say, well, what about one morning in the middle of next week? Or in 2 or 3 weeks from now, let's do this. Or next on the agenda. Or everybody get their calendars out. Maybe something like, well, we'll be sending a group text, or watch for an email on those updates, or, well, we need to all meet at least an hour before, or the reason we're doing all this work is, or we know this is going to be a lot of work, a lot of tasks, but it's going to be a huge win for this ministry or for this project, or let's get together soon and let's talk through these details. Or you might have asked, who on this team in our congregation can help us to accomplish this mission? Or maybe you've had to get a little bit critical and say, now I know all of us have different communication styles differently, but everybody needs to make sure that we use the Google shared calendar, because last time we had a mix up on our dates. So everybody, we've got to make sure we use that. Maybe you heard things like that. But let's get deeper into the minds of those that are on our teams and attempt to hear maybe the thoughts that were in their mind that were never spoken out. Maybe they said something like, what day is the middle of next week? Or why can't we just pick a day now? Or I'm so glad we have this agenda so that we can all stay on task and we don't go down a dozen rabbit trails. Or I get weary of constantly scheduling something on the calendar. Maybe I hate checking my email was a phrase that was going on in somebody's mind, but they didn't say it, thankfully. Or these text groups drive me crazy. Maybe even, why are we even doing this? This is going to take tons of work. Maybe you've gone back to some meetings that you'd wish had gone differently, or some that went great because you already have figured out personalities. So today we're going to talk through a 30,000-foot view of communication styles, generational differences, and how that impacts personalities and team members. And then maybe even some tests and some helpful things that you could have your team members do in order to look into their personality types, how they can be effective on the team, and how they can be the most effective team members and help with the mission of the church. So Sister Seneatha, she's going to talk to us about some of those communication styles and what that looks like for all the different personalities that are on your team.
Absolutely. And the crazy thing is that when you first become a leader, or even when you're working with a team, you might be able to only relate to a few specific people. And it's because you relate to that communication style. But here's the key we all need to keep in mind is that everyone deserves a spot at the table. I need somebody's list and agendas to make the big vision happen and for people to care and concern about what is happening to the other people and how it affects them. So everyone deserves a seat at the table, and they absolutely have to contribute to your big vision that God's given you to be able to move his kingdom forward. The cool thing is that Jesus had 12 disciples, and I'm pretty sure every single one of those disciples had different communication skills as well as different personalities, and Jesus communicated to them effectively. We always want to be more like Jesus, so in our communication styles and our team building, maybe we can take a couple tips to help it be more effective. So whenever we give communication, we give it differently. We also receive communication differently. And we need to be able to speak effectively so everyone can hear really what we're saying. So all those thoughts, all those comments that Brother Reinking just mentioned, they happen at a meeting and they happen all the time. And your ability of a leader to be able to channel those properly or communicate properly is key to team building and really making things successful. So some solutions and tips are you have people at the table that are big visionaries, and that might even be you. You love to plaster those big ideas up on the wall and just allow everyone to kind of dive into the details. You don't want to know the details, but you just want to give the big vision. You want to make things happen now. You need the big picture, and you want to get straight to the point. You might even want to bend the rules a little bit. You have people on your team that way. So whenever somebody wants to bend the rules, you might have somebody that doesn't want to bend the rules, and there might be a little bit of conflict. But just know that everyone can communicate effectively and work together to make this happen. You also have people on your team that are very considerate about how each one of these tasks or projects are going to make them feel. They are very aware, hypersensitive to how it's going to make other people feel and how it's going to affect them. Some of these team members might need small talk in the morning. I know that whenever I first started working in the corporate world, I had a couple people that worked under our team. In the morning, they wanted to have small talk. They wanted to hear about how my weekend went or how their weekend went. And after that small talk, it kind of warmed them up. Then you can talk about projects for the day, but they don't want to jump right into the projects for the day. However, you might have somebody that does want that list. Like, hey, what do you expect of me? What's on the agenda? What are the moral codes? How do I follow the rules? How do I make this the best that it can be? Now, those lists might make your visionary exhausted. So you kind of have to understand how to communicate properly. Another type of person you might have at the table is somebody that's very logical in their thinking, that facts. So you might present an idea and you might say, well, I really feel that this is really going to move the congregation. Well, somebody might ask, okay, that's how you feel about it, but why? What are the facts? What are the logic behind this thinking, and how do we make it happen? So those details are crucial for them to get buy-in on your team. So to be able to speak to each one of those types of personalities and communication is key to make sure that your vision moves forward. So in each one of these communication styles, how we receive and communicate, there's also generational differences. So each person might be big visionaries, or they might do this, or they might do that. However, generational changes and differences does play into our communication styles and our team building. And Brother Reinking is going to kind of tell us a little bit about generational differences.
Absolutely. So for today's context, I'm not going to get into the years necessarily or all of the categories of what makes you a baby boomer or a Gen X or a millennial or a Gen Z. But those are the four main ones that I'm going to kind of think through here, and just a quick, even the differences in how those people parent and how they grew up, their workplace motivation. That translates over into those people who are volunteers on your church. That how are they raised and what kind of workplace and what motivates them in the workplace. That will probably also be a factor when they're working for the nonprofit, the church organization, the kingdom of God. They can't help themselves because that's just kind of what they heard and what they were, even though they know the cause of God is great and good, some of that personality and those generational differences are still going to bleed over. I mean, just think about some of the different parenting styles of those of the baby boomers, that they would have been more of, the family getting together and talking through issues, having family meetings. Those parents would have likely allowed their kids to play outside till dark because the world was a safer place then. The parents trusted the kids more. The kids were trusting of the parents, and that would be more like a because I said so generation, one that they obeyed and they worked together well just because that's what the parents said, and the kids knew the role and the parents knew their role. Then you have others who might be of a helicopter parent, where they're just constantly hovering and constant involvement and constantly watching over. That would be those Gen Xers, that they want to be really involved in parenting and they want to be really involved in watching over. So if you're that kind of leader or you're that kind of person, you get a lot of satisfaction when you are, satisfaction may be the wrong word, but you feel like you're being the most effective because that's how you were led as a kid, from your family. Also now, more on the millennial and into the Gen Zers would be that free expression, where parents are allowing kids to freely express themselves and come up with their own opinions. And while that's dangerous for those of us that are worried about morality, and we see that in our world, again, not the topic of today, but the good part of that is that those millennials and Gen Zers can see, how can we get into new areas and how can we do new things? You need those people on your team. They're going to help push beyond the just because I said so. They're going to help creative ways to get the gospel out there that we've never thought of before when you're allowed to give them some free expression. Now let's think a little bit about workplace motivation and what helps those different generations. Just again, some big summary here. We don't have time to get into the details, but just a quick overview of it is that oftentimes those boomers, those baby boomers, were like, what do I get for working? The money side of it. Now that doesn't mean if you're a boomer, you're only going to work for God if you get something out of it. But those people were really, that generation is really concerned about how much are they going to get paid and receive for doing that work. And so those kind of motivations, those kind of plaques and trophies and different recognition could be really valuable to that generation. Also, the next generation would be maybe that they would value competency over seniority in the workplace. They would rather see someone get promoted and be put on the right seat at the table because they're competent in what they know, instead of just because someone's been around long enough. And so this would be where they want someone to see what they bring to the table, that I am valuable, see me working. And then the next generation would be more of a workplace culture or flexible scheduling. They want to be able to work together. How can we best work with our schedules? How can we best work all of our strengths and weaknesses to make sure together that we're doing this? It's not about necessarily a hierarchy. They want to feel like there's a level playing field. And then finally, our Gen Zers would be more about, why am I working? What is the big picture? They want social rewards more than they even want something in their 401k or even in their bank account. They want something in their emotional bank account. So you can get some Gen Zers to do some incredible things on your team, and not that we're going to be cheap and not pay them or not give them some kind of benefit, but when they see a life changed, that's why so many great things are happening, what I believe, through youth and young adults, because they're growing up in that whole social reward type of environment right now. Because how we share information and how we like to receive information, as Sister Seneatha talked about earlier, is not just in how I communicate, but it can be how I was raised in the time period and the societal issues that were going on. So just think about that when you're sitting around the table or sitting on a Zoom call the next time you're leading your church into a big project. Is that think about, okay, I've got to remember this person, they come from different generations. They speak different, they talk different. This thing right here, my phone, when I see my two teenage sons using this communication style to talk to someone instead of using this communication style, it makes me wonder, who are they talking to? Because my kids, their strength is not to where they want to talk on the phone. They would rather do this way, or they'd rather do this way, where they're FaceTiming or social interacting this way instead of speaking this. This makes my oldest son nervous to think that he has to call somewhere to see if the store is open. He'd rather just Google it or rather text a friend and ask. And so many of us, as leaders, we might rather be phone people or text people or email. You've got to realize that just like you feel differently, so can those generations feel more comfortable with email or feel more comfortable with text or calls. So as a leader, you've got to try to establish, I would suggest that you establish something that this is the common form of communication when we're dealing with this part of our church and when we're dealing with this layer of our leadership. We're going to try to communicate on all levels so we reach everybody. Local church, it's okay for emails, text groups, every which way, so you can try to reach every generation and how they hear and how they receive things. There's so many different personalities. We don't have time for a Bible study here today, but there's so many different personalities in the Bible. But there's one phrase that stuck out to me when I was thinking about this seminar, and that is this phrase called the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You see that phrase in the Old Testament and the New Testament, and we understand that Abram, his name was changed to Abraham. He had so many powerful encounters with God, for trying to see God's promise fulfilled. Isaac, he has to navigate that difficult relationship with Ishmael and the dramatic experience of nearly being offered, as a sacrifice by his father. And he's given a spouse he'd never met before. And then you have Jacob, who's deceiving his brother Esau, and he runs away and then is eventually deceived himself by Laban when he's trying to reach after his future bride, Rachel. And you see all of these emotions and all these different things that are going on. But yet there was still a commonality. They all had the same God, and they all had very powerful experiences and came to know God for themselves. So God communicated to them in different ways because they went through different life experiences. So remember this on your team, that the thing that binds us together is that we all are seeking a common goal, and that's to have encounters with God and to help others do that same thing and to build the kingdom of God. You might be sitting there thinking or listening as you're driving down the road thinking, wow, this is all so much information. What do I do next? What's the next steps? Sister Seneatha is going to talk a little bit about what you can do, some practical tips of tests and things.
Yes. So, like Brother Reinking said, this is a lot of information, and I am nowhere near an expert, not licensed to teach all these tests or talk about them. I'm just very passionate and a little bit of an enthusiast when it comes to personality and behavioral tests. So there is a test called True Colors. In fact, we even have people in the UPC that are licensed and able to administer this test and teach the communication styles that were briefly taught or briefly explained earlier in this video. So you can even get on their website and find them to bring them to your local church so you can assess your team and understand how to communicate a little bit better, as well as the Enneagram. It's more based on behaviors. They're all different numbers, and you can kind of understand why people do certain things. As well as the DISC program. Whenever I was at the hospital, we used the DISC program, and it is about how people work. Like, you have influencers, you have dominant, you have steady, you have competency, I think is the next one. And it talks about how people work, their workspace, and how you really can challenge them and drive them in the work environment. And Myers-Briggs, I'm pretty sure that's probably the oldest one around, and a lot of people will take the Myers-Briggs to understand themselves a little bit better. But all of those are tools that you can use that maybe you could bring to your next staff meeting and really assess your team to understand how to better communicate, how to involve them. Because I've learned, as I've read through all these tests and taken these tests and really kind of read books on them, is that I appreciate so much more how people do things the way they do, because then I can see what thrives them, what makes them excited, what can they sit at the table all day and do and not even get up and take a break, what inspires them. And if I can understand that as a leader, maybe we can really do this thing better together. So as we end this session, I know a lot of information was given, and we talked about tests and all of that, but just a couple practical things, and maybe Brother Reinking, you can tell us how you've seen this really work for our entire team. But I really do encourage you guys to dig in and really learn your team members, because once a team member feels validated because you're speaking their language, it's almost like they break outside of their box and really communicate and pour in to whatever project you have for them.
Absolutely. You have a lot of valuable people on your team when you can really figure out how to talk to them and how they're trying to talk to you and those differences. So thanks so much for joining us today. I hope that you go back, maybe re-listen to some of this, and it's just really a blessing to the work of God that you're trying to do in your local church context. And get to know those team members, because when you do, I believe it's going to propel you and it's going to help you to grow at a much faster rate, and also help you to be the most effective leader that you can be. Thanks for joining us today.